Hello and welcome to today's webinar. It's Keith Martin from CAFI. We'll start in just a few moments. Hello, everyone. It's Keith Martin from CAFI. I'm going to start the webinar in about 30 seconds. We're just waiting for some additional attendees to join. Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome to this third CAFI webinar of 2025 on cybersecurity challenges in the insurance industry, the risks, and how to mitigate them. My name is Keith Martin, and I am the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Financial Institutions in Insurance, or CAFI. On behalf of myself and the CAFI Board of Directors and my colleague and CAFI's research analyst, Robin Jennings, I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar today. CAFI is a not-for-profit association dedicated to the development of an open and flexible insurance marketplace. Our 14 members include the insurance arms of Canada's major banks and credit unions, along with their insurance partners which underwrite credit protection insurance and travel insurance. Members of the audience, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panelists during the webinar, please send them to us as the host using Zoom's Q&A function, and we will pose them on your behalf. Now, we are fortunate today to have a leading expert on cybersecurity risks. Neal Jardine is a recognized leader in cyber insurance and risk management with over a decade of global experience across underwriting, claims, and incident response. As Chief Cyber Intelligence and Claims Officer at BOXX Insurance, he combines deep technical knowledge with strategic insight to help shape sustainable cyber insurance products and risk solutions. Neal has successfully managed hundreds of complex cyber incidents, including ransomware, social engineering, and data breaches across North America, Europe, and Asia. His strong foundation in cyber underwriting enables him to translate real-world threat intelligence into actionable guidance for pricing, coverage design, and risk selection. Formerly the cyber practice leader at Crawford & Company, Neal is a trusted voice in the industry, frequently advising insurers, brokers, and business leaders on emerging cyber threats, claims threats, and resilience strategies. Just before we get the webinar underway today, I want to extend a special welcome to a number of VIP guest attendees. In addition to many representatives from our 14 CAFI member companies and our 12 associates, which are key supplier companies to the bancassurance sector, we have VIP attendees today from allied industry associations such as the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, or CLHIA, the Travel and Health Insurance Association of Canada, or THIA, from insurance research firm LIMRA, and as well from a number of insurance and financial services regulatory and policymaking authorities, including the following: the Insurance Council of British Columbia, the Alberta Insurance Council, the Government of Alberta, the Government of Saskatchewan, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, or FSRA, Quebec's Autorité des marchés financiers, or the AMF, the Chambre de l'assurance des dommages from Quebec, the New Brunswick Financial and Consumer Services Commission, or FCNB, and the Federal Department of Finance, Government of Canada. Well, now to get it started, I will pass it over to Robin Jennings, who will be leading this fireside chat with Neal. Over to you, Robin.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you so much. Neal, thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to ask you all these sorts of questions about cybersecurity and all the challenges it brings. Before we dive into, the real meat of all those questions, I'm just curious about you. What attracted you to the cybersecurity sector?
Yeah, I've always had an interest in computers. If you ask my mom, it started in high school when I got suspended for breaking into the network and setting up games, so my friends and I could play Quake and Doom during typing class. But I've always had a curiosity and interest in computers and networking. And so when I got into insurance, cyber insurance really wasn't a thing when I got into insurance. Back in 2005, I'd come out of university with a computer science background, networking, and so on. I got into insurance, was doing property, construction, tunnel boring, and so on. And then cyber hit about 2014. We started seeing cyber claims. A lot of them being handled by lawyers. But at the time, I had a real interest in it because I was trying to figure out how these attackers were getting in and what they were doing and was there a new attack vector that they come up with. And what I quickly realized from talking to people is a lot of the techniques they were doing was the exact same techniques that I was using in the 90s to get into systems and also keep networks protected at my university when I was there. And so I just had this natural curiosity and I slowly started shifting towards cyber and working with a lot of lawyers who are in the industry in order to help manage the claims and facilitate the recovery of a lot of companies. So yeah, just always had a really strong interest in the cyberspace protections and so on.
And is only growing, as we'll talk about later. So makes sense. I think you got into a very important industry. You seem to be very interested at a young age. Kind of talking about insurance, you mentioned a bit. Can you explain what traditional cyber insurance is and sort of how BOXX insurance differs, or maybe how it's similar, that balance?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a traditional cyber market, which we saw, even as early as the 80s and stuff, where it was very much an application-based cyber insurance market. A lot of companies have moved away from this or are moving towards other aspects, but a lot of the traditional model around cyber insurance was an application, and they would ask, "Do you have these controls in place?" And 10 years ago, sometimes it was 20 pages. Now, in some cases, for some businesses, it's not even a single question, it's just a scan. So traditional was very much here's a series of questions, you would answer the questions, and then you were given insurance. And what that was a point in time kind of verification process. The problem with a point in time verification process or application process in a cyber market is the attack vector is changing, the threats are changing. So what you necessarily had in place a month ago might not actually protect you for the future. I always get the comparison that a fire is a fire is a fire, and we've always had fire for what it is. So if you ask somebody if they have a sprinkler system, the sprinkler system is going to do the same thing in a year from now that it did now in order to stop fire. But something like we'll say MFA, MFA, 5 years ago we thought was going to stop everything. Now we realize MFA is great, but it's not as powerful as we initially thought because they've found ways to circumvent it. So traditional insurance was very much about question and answer, get those answers through the door, check off your box, move on to the underwriting process and go through. Underwriting has clearly evolved to more of a dynamic approach, which is kind of a bit about both using technology as well as a traditional model. So you still have that broker or that initial person who's going to talk the client through what is cyber. They're going to fill out a very kind of short, very pointed application, but it's going to include things like their name and their domain. And that domain is probably the most important part on that application because that allows us to go to more of a modern style cyber insurance where we're scanning and looking at that client from the external port. So a lot of people have probably heard of this as like a port scanning or a security assessment, but it's more than that as well. Like when you think about the modern way, because from that domain, I can do things like check leak sites for you, check what data breaches you're in, see whether or not your employees use their work email for online dating, whether they use it for online, other leak sites and so on. I can also see, are there any articles on Google about your company that involve the word cybersecurity, data breach, mismanagement, so on and so forth? And I can use technology to do all of those things in the underwriting process in the background. So traditional is very much check boxes, ask a question, do a point in time check. We're moving towards more of an underwriting model where it's you're doing that scan, you're doing that check. And then I should add as well, what makes it not a point in time check is we will actually do that throughout the entire policy period. And we can notify the client, hey, your policy is still active, you're working with us, but we found perhaps something on the internet or been a signal that we want to talk to you more about. So
So
that's
that's
kind of a traditional move towards modern, I'd say.
Would you, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, would you describe that as sort of like you're moving towards more of a prevention first, like a risk mitigation rather than just like checkbox?
Yeah, 100%. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is, right? It's you want insurance to not just be loss transfer, right? A lot of people look at insurance as it used to be a bit of a loss transfer technique, right? You're literally just going out and buying it because it was a contract requirement and that's it. Now, with a lot of cyber policies, you're getting those tools. Like you have things like we have an attack surface management product that clients get for free, and a lot of other insurers have similar things, right? Where again, it scans you, it looks for outdated software, it looks for controls online. We also have things like a vCISO service. So we basically have a bunch of cybersecurity experts that'll get on the phone with you and just talk to you about whatever it is that you want to talk about. Maybe it's changing your cybersecurity, setup, configuration, building an instant response plan, and so on. We also monitor again that things like what's on the dark web about about your employees. Are they all of a sudden in a massive data breach because again they use their work email, because a lot of hackers will use the leaked passwords to try and see if it works for corporations. So yeah, we're moving towards a model where it's not just insurance and loss transfer, it's building a kind of interconnected ecosystem where we're kind of seen as an arm of your cyber prevention or cyber services that you may buy, and that really works well with especially the medium and small to medium sized businesses in Canada. Like there's millions of small to medium sized businesses. I think I saw the last stat was like there's 10,000 really large companies in Canada or less. So, predominantly most of the cyber buyers of the future are going to be small businesses who don't have access to the services on their own. So they're looking, so for insurance to say, hey, we'll give you those. It not only benefits us as insurers because we offer better premiums, lower rates, additional services and so on, but it also benefits them because they don't have to go out and try to buy those things in a separate market. I think I'm gonna tag our marketing person will love this, but I think when I looked around online and stuff, if you were to buy like a pen test type program like what we do, policy libraries, vCISO services, dark web monitoring, and so on, it's like I think it's $70,000 or so if a company went out and tried to buy all those services. Whereas we just basically have built a lot of that in-house and we've given it away to our clients, like here, just go because it's we do it at scale, right? So works a little better for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So would you say then, how do I ask this question? Are larger FIs or SMEs more at risk of a attack then? Or it's pretty much equal, or is it equal?
So no, that's a great question. So like larger FIs, we used to think of them as the main target of ransomware groups and like they'd go after them, but they have very robust cybersecurity controls. And so what we're actually seeing is larger organizations are now looking at their supply chain or the companies they work with and saying, you're the vulnerable party. And when you go down, it interrupts my business. Or when you go down or when you have some sort of issue, it actually affects my reputation as a larger organization because I'm dependent on you for whatever reason, right? So we're actually seeing where there's, 5 years ago, I would say that those larger organizations seeing tons of attacks, they need to stay resilient and so on. They've actually become very cyber resilient, very so cyber strong, cyber savvy, as you want to say. It's actually the smaller organizations that they depend on that the hackers have shifted to. And hackers, like any good business, right? Because they're a business, at the end of the day are going, there's only, again, like I think it's 10,000 large companies in Canada. There's only so many of them I can tag. But if I go after the small businesses, there's millions of them. So where's most of my clients? If I was a hacker, it'd be in the small ones. So yeah, I would say, yeah. So we're definitely seeing the small businesses that are affecting the larger businesses through supply chain. The larger businesses are obviously still seeing attacks as well, but the small businesses are certainly seeing more attacks, lesser sophistication.
Oh, that's so devious. That's so crazy. How, I guess, can you apply that to insurance? What would that look like then? Because all insurers, Kathy works with large FIs, insurance providers, international insurance providers. Is there that vulnerability then throughout the supply chain as well, still for our members, for example?
So probably the members would be looking at something like a contingent business interruption type exposure. So it's not a breach of their network that's causing their downtime or causing their reputation. It's actually a breach of a supplier or someone that provides a service to them. And then so their insurance and stuff would provide them protection for the others that they work with. And the tricky part there is the insurance company is not asking for all the cybersecurity controls of the supply chain. What they're doing is they're assuming that that larger organization already has vetted controls in order to make sure that their supply chain they're working with is reasonable. We've seen a lot of companies start using our attack surface management or other tools. There's also BitSight out there and security scorecard and so on. We've seen large organizations actually use those types of software to put their entire supply chain in, and then they monitor their supply chain for attacks and for security scores or for leaked information, so that they can identify very quickly where their weakest link is in the supply chain and ask themselves, do I want to continue working with this business, or do I want to, perhaps look at other options or diversify so that I'm not as dependent on that one?
I'm realizing as we're chatting about cyber attacks and all this stuff, could you actually describe a real life example of a cyber attack? It kind of, and then maybe then speak about how FIs should respond if they experience one, or arguably more important, how they should not respond if they do get attacked.
Yeah, sure. So there's a few different types of cyber attacks. The most common, the one that we see like 8 or 9 out of 10 times, is financial crime and fraud. It's very lucrative. It doesn't require a lot of sophistication. Hackers just do it very quickly without even breaching networks in some cases. So, the most common one we're seeing right now is they're identifying that one company works with another company, either through a relationship like LinkedIn, or through maybe you advertise online and say, hey, we have a partnership with this company and we're working with X bank in order to develop this, right? Well, what they'll then do is they will craft an email that looks like it's coming from the president of that company to someone else, which is the hacker or the fake company they've made, saying, hey, here's our pen testing, or here's the invoice for whatever technology or whatever item. And then they'll have another email they'll craft that then has the president responding saying, yes, please, that's great. Please forward that on to my accounting group. I've already read it. Just let them know I'm agreed with everything. And then what they do is the hacker will then forward that email on to the accounts payable people, CCing the president's email, but with one character off. And then what they'll do is they'll say, hey, per the email chain below, so-and-so's already reviewed this. Can you please process for payment? Copy the president in case you have any questions. Well, of course, if the accounting person gets it, they read the email chain and they go, oh, there's a whole conversation here about why this is approved. I don't want to bother the president over $80, $100, $200,000. So I'll just go, or they go, well, I'll just drop the vendor from this, reply to the president and ask him, do I need to verify this? Well, of course, then they're just emailing the threat actor group. So it's the most common attack we see, and you don't have to breach any network. All you have to do is find out that two parties are working together in some sort of relationship just by searching online, right? Again, AI is pushing the boundaries in how we're able to aggregate large amounts of data. So I can ask AI to give me relationships amongst companies that are perhaps doing business together, and it'll start identifying those for me, and then I can start crafting my emails. So that's a very simpler one, a very simple one. 2 years ago, we used to see it where they'd break into one email account, they'd look around at that email account for an invoice, and they'd email someone from that account in order to trick them. The issue with that they're having now is everyone's implemented MFA. So it's super hard to get into an email account. So now they're trying to take one step back and going, maybe I don't need to get into the email account. Maybe I can just craft something and go. What the issue with FI, or the issue FIs are facing in other companies, is that's a reputation damage, because perhaps they're impersonating one of the companies. So maybe they're impersonating the FI, or they're impersonating someone. And then they email, and that small company pays out $150,000 to what they think is their FI. They're paying back a loan or some other way. They're going to go to the FI and say, hey, I paid you and stuff. And the FI is like, whoa, you didn't, after an investigation. But that's a reputation, right, issue there, where now all of a sudden you're in discussion with this company. They feel like they got tricked. They feel like perhaps something on your end could have done it. Maybe they don't always want to admit fault on their own. So that whole financial crime also kind of dovetails into a reputational loss and so on. So what should FIs do and not do in that situation, we always recommend to clients that you should, like, maybe not often, but once or twice a year, just send a notice to your clients and say, hey, cybercrime is up. We're being prudent. We want to make you aware of this. If you want to make a change to banking information or you want to do it, you have to phone us at the number that's on the contract that we signed on X date, so on and so forth, or the original number that you put on your application for a loan with us, or you have to phone us at whatever. Like, there has to be some sort of established protocol in order to change it, because well, maybe not nobody, but people should not be able to change the bank just by making a phone call or an email just because they happen to be out of the country or they're busy in a meeting and stuff. If you're sending money, and you're changing from a traditional sense, that should involve an extra step or a verification. So that's the most common attack. Now, the other attack we see is ransomware, which everyone talks about. That's the big one when people think of cybercrime. I don't really like that idea because ransomware, it's certainly the one that gets the news and it gets people's headlines, but it's not the most prevalent. We've seen ransomware shift. Right now, what's happening is they're looking for those credentials online, the email and the password, and they're using automation to just try them at every single company they can, and they're getting hits. There's a lot of companies out there who have domain administrators who use their, the same password they also use on LinkedIn or a dating website. I keep picking on dating websites for some reason, but they use the same password again and again. So we're actually seeing I forget the name of the ransomware group off the top of my head, but they are known to reuse old passwords, and we've seen them come across my desk a few times in the last couple months. And what they do is they get in and they launch their ransomware. So how's that changing? Let's go through how they're changing real quick. They are actually changing tactics in the way that they used to encrypt everything and then steal the data. And the issue with that is stealing data takes time because you're in the system, you're encrypting it. You're also trying to get that data out, so you don't want to get flagged. It just takes a while. And a lot of companies nowadays have realized this happens. So they've started requiring redundant backups that are offline, segregated, 3-2-1 backup rule for those that want to look it up on the internet, but start at a tape and so on. So clients have actually decided, when it's their decision, of course, to pay a ransom, they've actually said, well, actually, I have a backup, so I don't necessarily want to pay the ransom. And so how that caused things to shift is ransomware group. I was just reading about one about a month ago. They're shutting down their ransomware as a service, and they're actually focusing on building a business around data exfiltration as a service. So what they're going to do is create small programs that are able to be embedded within emails and other bits of software that will go into computer systems and start siphoning off data. And then what they're going to do is they're going to extort companies for that data and say, if you don't pay me, I'm going to post the data. And what they've said one step further is they want to create like a WikiLeaks type page and put all that data on there, so that if you don't pay, your data ends up on this very organized, very easily searchable website on of course, the dark web that other companies can go to. So that's how they're changing tactics. They're realizing that ransomware came out. Everyone went and got backups. They, configured themselves. They hardened their controls. They required MFA. They blocked a lot of road access. So the hackers have shifted now, and they're starting to look and say, well, okay, how can we still make money? We can make money by exfiltrating data and then saying to people, we're gonna post this online unless you pay for it. And in order to step that up one notch, they're gonna make it easier for others to get that data by putting on the dark web in an organized fashion, which right now a lot of that leaked data ends up on a leak site somewhere and it's not as organized. So those are the two most prevalent. I can touch on one more if you want, but
That's fascinating. That's so complicated too. So can I just ask, who are these cyber criminals? When we talk about cyber criminals, I think and I can't speak for our audience, but I have this image of like a hacker in his mom's basement with all the like windows boarded up. But I don't know if that's accurate.
yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. Well, in the 90s, it was me in the library at the high school installing
Right.
Duke Nukem. But yeah, so Nowadays it's very well organized groups. Like these, we do see the independent hackers, right? The hacktivists and so on, right? Businesses take a stance one way or the other, politically right or wrong. I'm not going to get into that. But then we have the individual hackers who decide to go out and make a statement about what they're doing. We still see those, right? We have clients who denial of service attacks, which just take down their website. We still see those. We're always going to see those. But majority of cyber criminals nowadays are set up like organizations or like businesses. We see that they have a president, they have, different divisions within, they have a coding group. Some of them go so far as they actually have it where the person that breaks into the company comes to them and says, "Hey, here's access to this company. I want 10% of the ransom. You guys take it from here, or you people take it from here." And so then what happens is they'll then shift it over to their ransom negotiation team. So when you reach out, the ransom negotiator will give you the price, and you'll obviously say yay or nay. But if they say nay, sometimes that individual has to go back to their manager to get approval to drop it. And they'll actually write and say, "I have to get approval for this. Give me a second." And so you're actually talking to someone who's part of an organization. And then, of course, if the manager does, they'll approve it or not, and then they'll shift you over to the group that'll actually help you with with decrypting your data and restoring your network. So they'll generally give you the decryptor. If it doesn't work, they'll work with you in order to fix it, because sometimes the decryptor doesn't work on your systems because of configurations. So they'll rewrite the code and they'll fix it for you in order to make sure it works. They want it to work because they want you to tell other people that when you worked with this criminal organization, they were good and they got your stuff back. It's a weird type relationship, but it is kind of interesting how it works that way. And then, of course, lastly, they'll also have a group that will give you, it's often just a one pager that says how they got into the systems, what it is that you should be fixing, and so on. And some of it's as simple as, "We found the credentials here on the dark web. You should tell your administrator to not use the same credentials across multiple locations." Other times it's very in depth and it says, "You put an Exchange server on such and such date. It wasn't patched. We were able to find that once we got in it. We then did this, and that's how we were able to stay on," and stuff. So yeah, there's different levels. And they're set up like organizations with different groups. And I should add as well, we've, based on the leaks or not leaks, the information provided by the FBI in the US, which did a great job, we know that some of these organizations have HR, they have employee retention bonuses, they have bonuses around ransom payment amounts, right? There is actually infighting about where the ransomware group is going, where the business is going. Some people within the group don't feel that the business should be targeting certain sectors. Others feel that it should be targeting certain sectors. So there's that whole employees arguing within internal chat logs and the higher up. So yeah, it's not about the individuals. They are very much established like an organization. They're there to make money, and unfortunately, their customers are those who don't want to be their customers, but are customers because of lack of cybersecurity controls.
That's I keep saying it's wild, but it's just so interesting. And I can only imagine getting an email from a hacker being like, "Well, you have you're weak here," and we got in. I'm like, that's so condescending as well. How dare you?
Yeah.
But if they're organized, if they're set up like organizations, would they be easier to find and like how I'm trying to envision, I guess with an individual, they have their home address and their IP, but with these organizations, are they harder to find, easier to find? How do you manage that?
So they're harder and easier. So they very much have a presence on the dark web. So they'll often have a site that lists who they've hacked and where that information's for sale and so on. But they are hard to find in terms of they hide themselves. So they will hide and mask their IP address. They'll be located in areas around the world that maybe are a little more accepting of what their business model is, I guess the best way of putting it. Some of them are state sanctioned groups. So they're, the government is looking at it like a way for them to make money as well, because perhaps they're sanctioned in other areas. There's many different types of organizations around there. And, the FBI and other organizations around the world, Canadian intelligence, RCMP, and so on, they do a lot of great takedowns of these groups. I think there was an individual in Markham who was identified, I think it was 2 years ago or so, who was part of one of these groups. And of course, they took that down. So they are always doing their investigations. It's a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. You take down a group, and those in the group who didn't get caught will actually spread and try start a different one. The one that's currently looking at focusing on just exfiltration, I think, is part of a group that used to be called themselves Hunter International. So they've part of them got taken down. So now the part of the group that didn't is now going up to rechange their model and go off. So again,
Wow.
they're good. The other thing too is there's some of them are gangs. Like the financial crime and fraud ones are often gangs. So you can find them just by searching news articles. They're in certain areas of the world. And they'll publicly say it. Their belief is that if you pay an invoice or make a change of banking details because you got an email, of course, this is not me, this is their approach. They feel that you shouldn't be entitled to that money because that's absolutely ridiculous. We taught everyone in the 90s that email was a secure form of discussion or communication because we wanted to get everyone away from the letter and the fax machine. And now what we almost have to do is teach people that email is not a secure form of communication. It is a way of communicating, but it is not secure. So.
That makes sense. That kind of it leads really quite well into my next question, which is sort of what is that balance between government regulations with cybersecurity versus, organizations, FIs, protective frameworks, which is more critical, or are they both essential to combat cybercrime?
I think they're both essential. I think, FIs have a role internally, and so does the government. I think that some people have asked me before, should the government legislate cyber insurance for companies and say you have to have cyber insurance in order to do something? I don't think that that is a way that would be very effective. I think the best way to do it is for the government to put in requirements that companies have to follow. And then they decide how they want to handle that risk. So, case in point, the privacy laws we have, right, are very much if you don't report, here's what the fines are. If you have a breach or viewed access or stolen personal information, right, or so on, as an example, you have to notify people. You have to provide them with things that will help mitigate their loss. So credit monitoring, a call center, notification of what happened, steps they can take, so on and so forth, right? And there's a case in BC and stuff where somebody was, the company was grossly negligent in handling of personal information that led to it being stolen by an employee who did it knowingly and then sold it to others. And so they are seeing a rather large amount of damages per individual that's affected by that. So it's like the government has put in these requirements for companies to follow. And then what they've said, those companies, is I want to transfer this risk to insurance because I need additional safeguards or security that if this does happen, I have a financial way of recouping any loss that I have, right? It's kind of, and insurance also, I think, has a bit of a role in that, right? Because what insurance does is it looks at what the government's requiring, what the government's asking, and it's saying, great, if you want to transfer the risk to us, you have to have MFA in place, you have to have, redundant backups in place, and so on and so forth. The example I always say is nobody woke up one day and went, man, I want a seatbelt in my car. That would be amazing. What happened is, everyone was like, you know what, we need seatbelts in our car and stuff because we want to get car insurance because I want to buy a car. And in order to get a car, I need a loan. So I need insurance. And therefore, in order to get insurance, I need a seatbelt. Okay, great. Let's put a seatbelt in it, right? Or the government said everyone needs to have insurance. Well, I guess that's a bad example because I just want to get into that. But the point is like, okay, we'll do home insurance. We'll do home insurance. But like building codes, right? Same idea with building codes, right? Government came out and said, in order to build a building, you need to do this, right? But a lot of it was the insurance companies saying you can't build out of straw, right? You need to have concrete in there. You need to have a sprinkler system if you want to give the risk to us, right? That if your building burns down or there's an earthquake. And so eventually, people started doing that. So I think there's a bit of a role between everybody, between government and between organizations that want to transfer that risk as well in order to survive.
How does it change, or what happens with the international aspect? Because, we talk about these cyber criminals And you've already mentioned, the US and different parts of the world, and I'm sure these cyber criminals don't exactly listen to borders. So how does that balance with the international aspect?
Yeah, they certainly do not care about borders, but we do see more attacks in some parts of the country than, sorry, some parts of the world more than others. Like the US is the most attacked country in the world for cyber. It's also not the birthplace of cyber insurance necessarily, but it's where most of the cyber insurance is, from my understanding around the world. Um, so yeah, we do see a lot of it in the US. The cyber criminals aren't really, I guess, choosing one area or another unless it's for their benefit, because some of the countries that are very allow them to stay there or operate their businesses there, do it on the basis that those threat actors or those cyber criminals don't target the country they're living in, so to say. And so again, it's not government sanctioned. It's not government. I don't want to say that because I don't know it for certain, but it would give the appearance that perhaps they don't target where they are located, and they have perhaps go towards the U.S. In terms of kind of how the world's handling it, obviously GDPR in the EU was fantastic when that came out, and certainly the regulation requiring that other countries that are handling their data abide by that. I think that pushed some controls for others. We're seeing some changes there around NIST and so on being added as well. The US is great. I love their reporting requirement. Basically what it is just making sure that others know about it. They're putting it very much at the board level discussion, so the boards need to be having that discussion. I think it's a board level conversation everywhere. In fact, I already know it is a board level conversation because we're seeing it around insurance policy selection as well. Canada's doing great. I love the fact that, I think it was, I want to say Alberta, I think it was 2015 or it was early. Anyways, I'm dating myself now. I'm trying to think how far back it was. But anyways, we started out with privacy requirements. We very much were moving those forward. There was privacy bills that were in front of Parliament that got kind of pushed aside, but they're going to probably get resurrected, and it's great. At least we're moving forward, all that stuff. I think that around the world, just the fact that companies have to notify individuals that are affected, we're seeing better controls. We're seeing companies be more careful about the type of information they have and how they handle it, and where it ends up and stuff, right? I remember back in 2000, it was 2014, I did an email breach, and this lady had literally emails from like 10 years sitting in her inbox and stuff. So, it was a massive data privacy event at the time. Nowadays, that'd be handled very different than it was way back in 2014. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of good things happening around the world around notification and awareness, which builds customer confidence. I think one of the downsides of all of this, or maybe not the downside, but the thing that a lot of people have to realize is a lot of your information is already out there. So yes, your information is being stolen, and yes, it's out there. I'm glad that we're not seeing the punishment purely for the fact that a company had a breach, and it's more around what it was that was breached and what it was that was stolen. The reason why I say that is because, you know, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, the biggest companies in the world with the greatest technologies, they have data breaches, they have security failures, right? So it's almost like punishing a company because they had a fire, or because, right, they didn't. It should be more about not the fact that they had a cyber attack, but more about what controls they had in place at the time. Were they reasonable? Was the board reasonable with the controls they chose? Were they reasonable around the protection of the information that was stolen? Right, kind of going back to that BC case, right? We saw some pretty hefty amounts there because of the fact that they weren't reasonable with their handling of information. Whereas we've seen other cases where they did everything they possibly could, and the courts were like, you know what, that's reasonable what you did. Okay, great. Because it sounds terrible, but every company is going to experience a cyber attack at some point. It's so prevalent. So
Okay, that is a little ominous, but interesting, because that's kind of one of my questions later on, is to ask you essentially, how concerned should, like, if we're talking about it in cyber security and cyber crime in relation to insurance, how concerned should insurers be in general? I guess you're saying they should be concerned. Everybody should be concerned.
yeah, like I didn't mention this earlier, but it's not a cyber crime event, but the fastest growing sector of cyber we're seeing right now is just cloud outages. Like look at CrowdStrike, CDK, MoveIt, all of those were outages due to third-party software providers, right? So kind of
Wow.
back to that supply chain discussion, but not about having it being malicious. CrowdStrike wasn't malicious. CrowdStrike was an error in code that just happened to make it past everyone and end up on the internet, and of course crash their systems. So, we're seeing a big push for cloud outage as well, making sure that you're protected for your supply chain or for those that are out that you depend on. So, yeah, every business at some point is going to have a cyber event. The good thing about it is more people buy cyber, the better spread of risk we get. Better spread of risk we get, the more data we get. We're able to generate better premiums and so on around that, which is even better. We said, fire insurance, we have thousands of, well, not thousands, probably 500 years of history on fire insurance. We maybe have 10 in cyber. And the problem too with cyber, which unlike fire and other thing, is the attack vector changes. So yes, the risk grows and changes so much. It's kind of like back when we had more hay and straw buildings with fire versus we added concrete, right? We're now kind of going through that. Everyone could buy cyber insurance to know only those have good controls, therefore better controls, better premiums, better understanding of the risk, standardize that, and so on. So again, as we grow as a market in cyber, we're going to see more people coming into it. Case in point, back in I think it was 2021, loss ratios are almost at 430% for cyber insurers, right? We were paying out almost $4.50 for every dollar we took in, because it was very much like, do you have a computer? Here's your cyber insurance policy. Then we all started implementing MFA, then we started implementing backups and so on and so forth. And now I think it's hovering around 100% loss ratio, which is pretty good. Like most insurers are going to want to be just below and stuff. So there's a bit in there, but the idea is as we're getting a better understanding of cyber and cyber grows, we're starting to get better controls in place. And the flip side of that as well is as you get better controls in place, we get a more stable market. We see loss ratios start to come down to a reasonable level. We're seeing expansion of control of coverages. This year we are starting to see financial crime and fraud, which I come back to that invoicing fraud. A year ago you could get $100,000, maybe $250,000 limit. Now you're seeing insurers looking at $1 million limits. Like that's massive. The fact that you can pay an invoice, it'd be $900,000. You mess up, insurers are like, yep, we can take on that risk. I think the biggest one I ever saw was 3.2 million go out the door because of somebody who paid the wrong invoice. The cyber criminal was in the email, changed the contract details. Nobody double checked the contract details. Anyway, so they paid 3.2 million to the wrong party because they followed the contract. But the point is we're seeing an expansion of coverages in the market because of the fact that we're seeing things stabilize and we're getting more data and insurers are better understanding the risks.
Fascinating. So can you speak to the areas maybe where the insurance sector is most vulnerable for a cyber attack then? Like even within insurance companies themselves, we talk about with all this conversation about Gen AI and AI in general, and some businesses being slower to adopt AI. Will that be a hindrance? Like legacy systems, maybe a hesitancy around new technology. Are those going to hinder you when it comes to cyber attack and protection?
I don't think they'll hinder. We always have legacy systems being an issue, outdated software, because if one software stops being updated, it becomes outdated. But we work with a lot of clients to just put that as an offline feature, right? So have it embedded somewhere in their network where it doesn't have access to the external internet. It's very much segregated and controlled, and so therefore we're okay. Because we see a lot of manufacturing. Where they have the same computer that's been running the CNC machine for the last 20 years and they don't want to update it. So yeah, so we see with outdated AI. I don't think AI is really going to change us too much. We are seeing more creative cyber attacks because of AI. Again, the augmentation of large amounts of data. There's no restrictions within cyber policies around AI. Cyber is already starting to see losses from it, and we're understanding them and we're okay with them. Where we are seeing again bit of exposure here, not to call it Air Canada there, but Air Canada put that chatbot online, which gave the gentleman the wrong advice around a refund. And of course, they tried to argue that the AI made an error and not them. And of course, there's decided, no, you put the AI out there, therefore you're responsible for it. That was great. That gave a lot of people a clear understanding about what it is with AI, right? You put it out there, you train it, you better understand what the consequences are. So make sure you put some ring fencing around it and so on. We might see some data privacy exposures around AI, right? Some companies are using AI for things maybe a little risky. I think the big exposure there is going to be companies that try to say no to AI and they say no using AI whatsoever. Employees are very creative. What they're going to do is just basically open it on their phone, copy it, try to find an app on the internet that allows them to bypass the AI thing and drop it in, right? So it's almost like that whole get AI and have a policy around it so employees understand proper use and give them an outlet where they can use it. And, Microsoft and Amazon and others have already built AI models that you can plug in that have no connection to the outside world. They are your own model and you can use it in your environment, and it's not going to be, and you can very much control how that happens. So yeah, I think that's a bit of an exposure. We might see some privacy exposure as a result from that. Attack vectors, AI going through code and finding errors and finding vulnerabilities will definitely be. But yeah, at this point, I don't see it blowing up the market. We were worried years ago about supply chain. Obviously, dependent businesses is a big exposure. The whole car dealership issue where we found out that, the car dealerships, a lot of them were using CDK software. CDK went down, dealerships across North America went down. There's some massive claims out of that came out. I couldn't believe it, but I was dealing with that, and then my lawnmower broke. I went to the John Deere dealership, and I found out the John Deere dealership used the same CDK software. So, yeah, not only are our cars not being sold, my lawnmower also didn't work, which upset me. So yeah, so as a side note there, but yeah, so I think that's it. As insurers understanding supply chain exposures would probably be another big thing as we move forward. But well
Okay,
understood.
that's fascinating. And it's so dynamic too. I guess also made me think about your comment earlier for the financial attack, like that email exchange with like a fake president email or CEO and then going back and forth. That's part of that is a bit of taking advantage of human error, right? And I get how do you work with that? Like there's always going to be a human aspect that people are taking advantage of. And is there anything we can do with that?
Yeah, I think you need to build a culture, and I know Sarah's probably going to laugh at this. Her and I have had a bit of discussion about like the whole victim blaming thing. Like you can't say to someone that if they mess up or they have an issue with their email that is automatically their fault. If there's very sophisticated attacks out there and people are going to fall for them, what you need people to live in or work in an environment where when they see the smallest red flag or something that just seems slightly off, they aren't worried about bothering the president or bothering someone to ask a question because they feel like they're bothering someone. They know that that's their job. Their job is to second guess when they're making a payment for the company. Their job is to second guess before they send something out, right? That way, the individual is comfortable enough to raise that concern because the example I give is somebody breaks into your office and steals a bunch of files. We don't blame you for the fact that somebody broke through your deadbolt and cut off your ADT alarm system. But the moment somebody breaches your computer system, even if you had endpoint detection response in place, MFA, cloud monitoring, the whole works, we would still blame you as an organization and a company. So I think we need to shift that to realize that this is just a crime and you're a victim of that crime, but you yourself are not to necessarily blame for it. And then we teach the finance people that their job is to question those invoices when it's something different. Like obviously, if you're paying the same amount to the same company every single month, or you're paying to the same bank account all the time, yeah, you don't necessarily need to question that. But when that company changes banking information, that's weird. Like that is an odd thing to happen. You should be verifying that. If it's a new company, just phone them up and say, listen, we're aware cybercrime is an issue. I want to phone you and have a discussion. They shouldn't be shaming you for that and saying, listen, you're making this too difficult for me to work with you. They should be saying, thank you. I want to make sure I get paid. So that's
You
my
know what's ironic? That we're talking about these emerging technologies, cyber security and like all this stuff is changing. But at its core, the way we protect against it sounds like one of the components is human interaction. You're talking about calling up other people. So I feel like, that seems to be so important. We maintain that human component of technology and AI and all these things, being like, You can reach out and chat with somebody.
100%. Like that's what cyber criminals are prying on right now, right? We built technology so that they can't break it as easily. It
Mm.
costs time and money for them to break. Like if they get into one of our companies or one of our clients and ransomware that company and stuff, right? They might get whatever amount they get, but if they go ahead and send that fake invoice out, chances are they can make 50, 20, 30, $40,000 very like quickly again and again and again by crafting an email and working with AI in order to do it. Like I said, that one a client experienced, they got into an email. They saw that there was a contract negotiation going back and forth. They edited the payment details on the contract, and then the person replied, sending that out to the other person for them to get signed or whatever. And nobody bothered to check the payment details. And so when the person got the contract, instead of phoning and saying, "Hey, I got the contract with all the payment details. This is our first payment. Let's double check it." The person said, "Great, payment details are in the contract. Both people sign the contract, pay it." And boom, 3.2 million went to the threat actor. 30 days later, the company phones up and says, "Hey, what's the status of our thing?" And they said, "Well, you haven't sent us the money yet." And they said, "What do you mean? We sent it to you 30 days ago. We're now behind schedule. Where is this?" And they said, "We don't have it." Do an investigation, realize that an email account had been compromised, and they changed it. It just blows my mind. Anyways.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing. Kind of tangentially related. I'm going to pivot a little bit, but it made me think, I just read this article on Nova Scotia and this like cybercrime that happened recently between two energy companies. So like EMRA, the energy holding company, and then Nova Scotia Power, which is the biggest provider for electricity in the province. And I'm that shocked me because I didn't assume that cyber criminals would go for energy holding companies. So sort of why would they be interested in that, and just sort of what businesses, or all businesses, I guess you did say earlier that everybody should be cautious of cybercrime, but is this common, and are there other businesses that we don't usually think of, or they themselves don't think that they're going to be at risk that they should be concerned about?
Yeah, 100%. I think I froze for a second there. So if I do freeze, I apologize.
That's okay.
Okay, good. So yeah, I think I understood the question, but with power generation and other things like that, it's not necessarily about the data they hold, and sometimes it's just about the inability for them to operate, so you can extort them, right? So, companies are always like, "Why am I being extorted? Why would a ransomware group?" And sometimes it's not about them going after you because they want your data. What they want to do is stop your company from being able to operate and then charge you money to get access to that data so you can continue to operate.
Hmm. So
It's
everybody,
one,
anybody's at
yeah.
risk, really. Anything they can extort. I think also I read something about hospitals being potential victims of cyber attacks too, which is something I just don't think about that. That doesn't dawn. I think of them attacking banks and billionaires. So I don't, that's wild to me. Oh, you're
Yeah,
back.
hospitals are a bit of a restricted or not restricted class, a class that some hacker groups just won't go after.
Oh, why? Oh, you may have lost him.
Sorry,
Oh,
I
you're
think my internet just crashed there and I got it back up. Sorry about that.
no, that's okay. Technology it happens.
Yeah, that's I quickly switched to hotspot on my phone. You can tell I'm used to this sometimes. You live in a bit of a remote area. Yeah, so to your question, hospitals are generally restricted by a lot of threat actors. They'll actually actively try to avoid them because of the backlash from it. There was a death a few years ago because in the US, because some threat actors got into a hospital, were extorting it, and then of course a patient was diverted and that patient died en route to the diverted hospital because that hospital was effectively in the code red, we can't take anybody in, and that made the news. And so the threat actor groups have been like, we're not going to target hospitals. And so it's actually a point where some of them, if they do target a hospital or accidentally get a hospital, they will actually help that hospital recover. Of course, there's still malicious ones that will execute on it and so on, but there are a lot that are saying we will not target them because of the publicity and so on that comes with all that.
So reputation really does matter. So how these, as you call them, threat actors, who they attack, how they go about it, their reputation is essential then, so that people trust them in a way.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic. We've obviously seen some threat actor groups and we know that they will work with the client to recover themselves and help them get the client back up. And there's other threat actor groups we know that will not work with the client, and they will very much be, you know what, you've paid us, we're out of here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's almost like an honor amongst thieves thing. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, it's a weird dynamic. Again, for us as the insurers, we're just here to support the client through whatever it is that the attack they're going through in the recovery. It's very much on the client to make the decision about how they process and how they go through that recovery, and so on. So we see a lot of these, so we kind of see the same names again and again with who they're working with or who they're targeted or the type of ransomware and so on.
Oh my gosh, that's so fascinating. We're almost done for time, so I only have a couple more questions. Um, Within the insurance industry, do you find that there's one sector that's maybe more at risk of a cyber attack, like life and health versus P&C? And if so, why?
Yeah, I don't. There's it there isn't really one sector, I guess.
Mhm.
There are certain sectors that, insurance companies are weary of just because of the amount of data they hold, and how sensitive it is. So those are always going to be the ones that insurers are going to be a little more nervous about and double check the controls. The ones that get attacked the most are, of course, just standard retail, medium, small business because of the financial crime and fraud. The ones that get attacked that cost the most are the ones that have large amounts of data and depend on that data for operations. So I'll give you an example. We had a client who literally builds bespoke parts for the auto industry. And the auto industry comes to them and says, I need this part that goes in this machine that you made 15 years ago, and they make that part. And they may probably make that part once every 4 or 5 years for one company. They had a big ransomware event, and of course, they are sitting there going, "Well, why does anyone want our data?" And it's not about the value of the data; it's about the value of the data, the value of the data to the company. Like now,
Mm.
the next time that one company wants to order that part, they have to remachine it from scratch because they lost all of the drawings about how to make it, right? So that same thing can be applied to finance or anywhere else. Like if you lost the ability to know what the investments were for a certain client, or your last notes with that client, or what that client is interested in steering their portfolio towards, and so on, you as a business advisor, someone working with them, wouldn't be able to help with them as much. So it would set you back as an individual. The hacker really doesn't see much value in it, but they see the value that you have because you're working with your client on something or know something about the client, that they obviously want to charge you to get. And
Yeah, so it matters to the advisor. They can leverage you in that way because it matters to you, but not necessarily to the general public, I guess, or like they're not going to try to create a data leak with it. They're just going to try to extort you.
Exactly. And it also gets to the point where we see some financial advisors, which I've talked in the past about, they say I have clients reach out via WhatsApp, Facebook, and text message and so on. And I always say, well, how do you know that that's the client on Facebook, WhatsApp, text message, and so on? Like,
Oh
you
my
don't
God.
have any way of verifying. So how do you know that that's your client who decided to add you to WhatsApp and stuff and then ask a bunch of information about their portfolio and how they're doing? Like, you should choose a trusted communication, a trusted way of communicating and stick by it. Like, do not deviate because the client has decided that they are going to reach out to you in a different manner. But people want to feel like their financial advisor is their friend and so on. They want to
Mhm.
create that dynamic. The problem is that dynamic doesn't always work with the way that, or sorry, the problem is cyber criminals understand that dynamic, and so they're trying to also kind of get themselves in. As as bad as this is going to sound, banks are a little more rigid, which is great. I love it when my bank freezes my card and they're like, "Hey Neil, we want to give you a call and talk to you about this." I'm like, "Great, you guys are walking in the background, fantastic." Like, it should be difficult to get into my banking app. I should be
Yeah.
sent an MFA code every single time. I should have to change my password once in a while. All that stuff should happen. So yeah, I really like that. What I don't like sometimes is talking to people and finding out that, oh, I create different ways of communicating with my clients. Don't do that. One that's secure.
That
So
makes so much sense. My last question, because we're almost over time. How pessimistic are you for the future of cybercrime, cybersecurity? I'm kind of half joking, but I am generally curious if you feel optimistic about where this industry is going, or if you're pretty concerned.
I'm optimistic. I think that the good part is we're having more discussions like this. And these discussions are what matter. Education matters, people understanding the threats. Like the last thing that, or the best thing that happens to the cyber criminals is people don't talk about it.
Mm.
I'll go so far as to say, like, we do personal line cyber insurance, and the folks that we talk to who wish they bought it before they needed it because they didn't know that. This does sound terrible, but Keanu Reeves didn't actually love them and reach out to them on WhatsApp, right? Like, they didn't know that that was an attack vector that generally works on older individuals.
Oh.
So these types of cyber crimes, or, so even the commercial ones, the invoicing fraud, all of these discussions matter because it creates awareness. When you create awareness, you create education. Education helps, again, with cyber insurance and so on and so forth. So I just think building an ecosystem or a group or a business model where people feel comfortable talking about this, they don't feel like they did something wrong. They understand that this threat is real. It's the same as somebody breaking in the front door. We should consider it just the same.
I love that, kind of take away some of the shame I think is associated with it.
Exactly.
That's lovely. Neal, thank you so much for talking to me. I'm just going to ask Keith to join us again to close out the webinar. I apologize for going a minute over time, everybody, but yeah, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you both, Robin and Neal. That was very insightful. We really appreciate your expertise, Neal. I do want to mention that this is the last of our spring webinars. We'll be starting again in the fall with 3 new webinars, and we will be sharing information about that soon with CAFI members and associates. So thank you again, both, and I wish all attendees a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.